You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima. Well, good afternoon, Allison. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm so excited. We have a guest today that I'm really thrilled is here, and I've been looking forward to this conversation. Especially though, before I introduce her, because I know I've talked in the last few episodes about how we had, I think it was episode 40, we had my friend Liz on to talk about caring for her children. Her 4 kids have myotonic dystrophy, and her second child is best friends with my daughter, Maya. And I have hinted at this in the last few times we've been together, but about a week ago, Gianna passed away, and at the age of 16. And so it's been real heavy around here, as Maya and I have been at the ICU there with her and there in her final moments, and then just had her celebration of life. And so that's why we did not purposely interview Jane last weekend, because it was way too fresh for me. But I think at this point it feels still pretty fresh, but also good that we're going to have the conversation that we're going to have today with Jane. So there will be more time to process a little bit of what I've gone through recently in this conversation, but been pretty heavy around here, especially in addition to all that we've gone through in the last few months. So I'm looking forward to this conversation, not just for all of our listeners, but for me personally as well. I kind of wish Jane could just be sitting here, in my living room with me, giving me a big hug, because I think that's kind of what I need. But anyway, I've been hinting. So Justin, do you want to go ahead and introduce who our guest is today?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm sorry for, again, what your family's had to go through.
Thank you.
More death. And I know you've kind of been in a season of that, and that's can't be easy to be going through that. So I do hope that, as well as helping our listeners here, that it's a good conversation for you too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So, we're excited to introduce our guest to you all. This is Jane Whitlock, aka Death Doula Jane. She's an end-of-life doula based in the Twin Cities. She has a wonderful TED Talk talking about her work and kind of how culture thinks about death. Recommend checking that out. Jane, welcome. We're really glad that you've taken the time to be here with us.
Well, thanks. Thanks for inviting me. And I'm glad the gods of technology are smiling on us.
It's true. It's always a miracle when that happens, right?
Yes.
Jane, I want to give you a little bit of context, because I know you said you had listened to a few of our episodes, but maybe you started with some of the early ones. So I want to give you a little bit of context of just kind of what's happened in my life in the last few months. So since October, my family has experienced 4 deaths. A 30-something-year-old friend who has the same rare genetic disease that my husband has, my 98-year-old grandmother, my husband's 73-year-old mother that we were there in the last few weeks by her side through getting her to hospice to the very last breath, and then my daughter's best friend last week. So a lot of different kinds and so death has been on my mind a lot in these last few months, which is what gave us the idea to even have this conversation. And when I put out sort of the call to our community saying, like, we were interested in interviewing someone, does anyone have a suggestion? A number of people actually brought up your name, which was one reason we reached out to you. But another was because you were at one point in your life a spousal caregiver at a pretty young age, just like us. And so I thought you would be the perfect person. So can you tell us just a little bit about your caregiving story and what that was like for you?
Sure. I say, like, I was like everybody else in that, like, death and illness and caregiving were not part of my normal life. And then my husband in 2008, and this is, he died in 2013. So in 2008, he was diagnosed with a pituitary adenoma, and it was huge. And he basically had to have emergency surgery at the Mayo Clinic. And in his emergency surgery, I was assured that everything had gone great. He was going to be fully recovered. I'm calling all the people saying, we're good, went super well, blah, blah, blah. And then that was at 4 p.m, and he didn't get out of recovery until 11:30 at night. So my introduction to being his caregiver was so intense. Just sitting in the Mayo Clinic waiting room while the whole world is shutting down around me. Everybody's going home. Nobody can tell me where he is, why he can't get out of recovery. And then finally they they brought him up. I called my sister and I was kind of hysterical. And she's like, you have to force yourself to go to that nurse's station and find out where he is.
Mm.
So I did. And then they had trouble finding him. And
Oh.
then they're like, oh, we can't stop the bleeding. So, I mean, I was like, don't tell me things like that, you know?
Mm-hmm,
So anyway, they brought him up and I saw him and he was totally out of it, couldn't speak. His face still had blood all over it. It was just like, seriously, this is the Mayo Clinic? And then the nurse gave me the sponges to rinse out his mouth and to like washcloths to wash his face and a urinal to get him to try to go pee. I mean, it was like fast track caregiving. And I was stunned and I had never been with him when he couldn't speak. Yeah. And he was in a ton of pain. And that really didn't change. So basically they clipped his pituitary, the hair-like structure that connects your pituitary to your brain in surgery. Weren't aware that they did that for 2 weeks. So I brought him home. He was really, really sick. Sometimes didn't know who I was. I had a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old at home that were crazy rambunctious. Rob couldn't take any sound. I mean, I'm going into way too much detail, but it was like, whoa. You know, that I think for every caregiver, there's this moment where your partner, who you share everything with, who helps you make all the big decisions, is silently in a sidecar. Yeah. And sometimes totally inaccessible to you. And that kind of loneliness and the weight of that responsibility is crushing, and no one can prepare you for that. And it's just trial by fire. So for that whole experience, which, I mean, I think it took 3 years. He was never the same. He kind of rapidly aged. He was 44, 45. He got thinning hair, brittle nails, age spots, couldn't go upstairs. It was like he was a 79-year-old man, which for him, he was a marathon runner, you know. Okay. So that took a very long time. And I think my strategy as a caregiver throughout that period was, I'm just going to hold my breath and make it to the other side. Like, I'm going to make it back to normal. And it never occurred to me that this was my new normal. Yeah. It was like, nope, I'm going back to normal, even though we were going to the ER every 3 months and they would never listen to me and they'd shoot him up with morphine. And then I'm like, great, now he's out of it for 8 hours. I have 2 kids sleeping at home with a neighbor, you know. Yeah. So then when then in 2013, he developed this cough that didn't go away. And you alluded to the journey that I think the way everybody's journey with an illness start is this roller coaster of like, what is it? Yeah. Tons of tests. Nobody knows, no answers. I went through that with him. And then it was like, oh, he has kidney cancer. And that time I'm like, I am not going to hold my breath and make it to the other side. I am opening the doors wide open and like saying, I need help from my huge tribe. And I never said no to any offer. People came and stayed with me for a week at a time. I had people I was like, I give you free license to do anything that you think I might need. People came and raked the lawn. My neighbors put huge hearts in their windows facing my house. I mean, people would show up and walk my kids to the bus stop. I mean, it was unbelievable. So it was just 2 vastly different experiences. And I think the second round caregiving, what was hardest for me was that I knew he was dying. And because everybody was telling us he's got a super rare kidney cancer, there's basically nothing to be done. He was like researching Sloan Kettering. He was like researching every possible clinical trial. And I felt like I was on a train track. And my legs were just getting wider and wider because, you know, he was going in this one direction. And I felt like a traitor for not being like, that's right, we're going to beat this. And we're going to find a clinical trial. And I'm like, no, I have 2 little kids. I have to figure out what the hell I'm going to do here. Right. So I can't just be in this boat of like, we're going to beat this alone, you know? Right. So we had some sort of come to Jesus moments. And I'm sure if he was alive, he would understand why I felt that way, but I think he did feel betrayed and he was really looking for a cure. And I was like, I kind of want the support of hospice. Like
Mm-hmm.
I want more support. I don't know how to deal with this with the boys. They were
Yeah.
9 and 12.
Yeah.
So thankfully he had the kind of cancer where Sloan Kettering was like he went to the ER and his doctor showed up in the ER and said, in her street clothes after her shift was over, and she said, you need to go home, put your affairs in order. There's nothing more to be done for you.
Oh, wow.
I don't want you to do any more clinical trials. I don't want you flying around.
Yeah.
Like, you should stay home with your family. So yeah, that was devastating for him. But then I think this is what I tell my people. There is a moment when you turn toward death that if you are open to be transformed by it, everything changes. And that happened for Rob. And he was a worrier. He was a Virgo. He was always like, kind of like a little bit henny penny. That the worst case scenario for everything. And when he turned to face the end of his life, he had a smile on his face that I literally had never seen.
Oh,
it was this like gratitude for the moment that I had never seen in him. And I was just like so happy for him. He said, yeah, this is a short straw. For sure, this is a short straw. But like, I had so many long straws.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all that with us.
Yeah. Once I get started, it's like, whoa.
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It is. And I think the fact that you had that person who very clearly said that to you, because I just think about if that doctor hadn't said that, would that have continued with that? That's a really beautiful picture you painted of your legs, like him going this way and you going this way and you not knowing which way to go. And so, like, how different would it have been if you hadn't had that doctor to just paint that picture for him?
Right. I know exactly how it would have been because I see it time and time again. People don't even have the experience of dying. They don't have the experience of saying goodbye because they are pursuing treatment up until the time they are so weak and so sick that they can't do any of that work.
Yeah.
You know? And I think people, they don't realize that that's what they're giving up.
Right.
Their exit, they're, telling everybody how much they love them. They don't, no one ever paints that as like, this is what you're giving up to pursue this. We were at the Mayo Clinic and I had this doctor like slide this piece of paper that said Fortneb across the very oddly and weirdly. I'm like, what is this? And he's like, this is a stage 2 trial. So that's like basically seeing if people are going to live through the medicine. Like, it's not going to be helpful.
Right.
And so Rob wanted to pursue that. And the only reason we didn't is because one of the Mayo Clinic minions, all the guys in suits who come in, one of those minions called us and said, do you have any questions? And I was like, yeah, what's Fortneb? And what is a stage 2 clinical trial? And give us the results of the previous trial. And he's like, basically, like 28 people died or, it was really bad. Fortneb is like, that one doctor was uncomfortable not having a solution for us.
Right. Oh,
so
that's powerful.
Yeah. I just think that we just fell over ourselves thanking that doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how your experience with Rob, because you were not a doula before that, right?
No.
And so can you explain how your experience led you to this path?
Yeah. He spent his last 2 weeks of his life at Our Lady of Peace, a hospice house in St. Paul. And he really showed me, Rob showed me, once he faced the fact that he was going to die, he was like, sat down with each boy and he said, we told them, this cancer is going to kill him and we don't know how much time he has and he's probably going to get weaker. And what do you want to do with your dad in the time that you have left? And boy made a little bucket list. Like, I want to stay up late and have dude time or like I want to do Legos. And so they did it. Rob spent time with them. And then, it's so funny that grief is still in there. I've talked about this ad nauseum.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Then he went to this. He's like, I can't die at home because our kids won't be able to live here if like my dead body is here at any point. So we went to Our Lady of Peace. That was his decision. all his college friends came and spent time with him, and like old girlfriends were flying across the country. He's like, okay, I'm done with that. I'm done with the flying across the country. If we haven't talked in 6 years, like,
Right.
I don't need, I mean, he really showed me how to take the time that you have left. And he made a plan with me. He's like, what do you need from me? I'm like, I need a plan. What am I going to do? And so he made a plan that I didn't follow, but I had that experience crystallized like what really matters, and that time is short, and that I had been so entitled that I didn't even realize how entitled I had been about having this person that I loved with me forever. Like, hello, that's just like fairyland. Like, that's not how life is. Life is unpredictable and haphazard. So after he died, with that feeling of like, time is short, you have a purpose here, you better find it. And like, we don't do death well. We were in hospice. Our first hospice meeting, I had 2 nurses, a social worker. They all had laptops that they flipped up, and they started typing the second they came in the door. They never looked up. I never felt seen as a person. And then they snapped them shut, and away they went. I was like, really? These are the people who are going to prepare us about how we do this? I mean, hospice is amazing, but they're hamstrung. They don't have the resources. They don't have the money. Those poor hospice nurses, if you're good, you don't last very long because you're running henny penny all over the city. You're charting, So anyway, I just took that, like, I got to figure out why I'm here, and I was like, I'm following my intuition. Wherever it leads me, I am following. It is your intuition is my connection to universal source. And it so clearly led me to death and dying and grief. And then I found out about end-of-life doulas, and I did the training, and it's just, I did the TED Talk that changed everything. But I feel still we're so bad at talking about it. I feel really strongly that your dying experience is your last developmental stage as a human. And I have seen people who have been very difficult their whole lives long turn to like gratitude. And I don't want to be like, silver lining this, sugarcoating it. It doesn't happen for everyone. You have to be vulnerable and courageous and and show all your cards. And not everybody can do that. So there's plenty of people who die not being transformed. But the people who do it, it is like, it is a thing of beauty to behold. And I don't have a recipe for why some people do and why some people don't, but it is my job as a doula to say to dying people, like, you have a choice here. You have work to do around how you say goodbye and what business you need to clear up before you leave. I mean, this is not, wringing your hands, woe is me. This is like, you've got to roll up your sleeves and look at your life and what you need to make amends for. And the people who do that, I've seen families who haven't talked to each other for years and years and years finally have those conversations. And I don't like to put a lot of pressure on, like, you have to, do all the, like, a good death, or how are you supposed to do death? But I think it's an opportunity that you can let your fear and anxiety drive the bus, or you can let your vulnerable human heart drive the bus.
Yeah. So some of our listeners may not be familiar with, like, what is an end-of-life doula or a death doula. Can you kind of explain what it is that you do in that role and how that is similar or different to what hospice, which I think people are more familiar with, maybe provides?
So doula is a Greek word that means servant.
Okay.
And I think end-of-life doulas have been around since like maybe 2010. I mean, they're pretty new, and we're non-medical. So we don't dispense meds. Some doulas are CNAs, and they can do personal cares, which I think is super helpful. But we don't have medical opinions. We're not talking about treatment choices, any of that. And then we provide physical, spiritual, and emotional support for dying people and their caregivers. So really, the dying person is our client, and we're really good at listening. We don't do a lot of talking, although I'm talking a lot right now. But if you were my client, I would be listening. We're really good at listening for what matters. And we're good at being advocating and giving. You know, when you hear that you have a terminal illness, you lose control.
Yeah.
You know, and you lose autonomy.
Yeah.
And so like our job is to give them back as much control as they have, because caregivers, lots of times their own anxiety can push them to try to call the shots for this person who's vulnerable and dying, you know? And my job is to remind the family that, you know, it's this person's choice if they want to take this anti-anxiety med, or it's this person's choice if they want to take a lot of morphine and basically sleep until the end, or not take any morphine and be in pain, but be conscious. Like, these are not your choices. These are this dying person. And I think the other big thing that doulas do is, I like to think of it like we weave this basket, and we weave it out of experience and groundedness and calmness and a quiet confidence and safety and non-judgment. So we can hold this basket and we are strong, so that the person who is carrying worry, fear, things they can't talk to with their family because they don't want to scare them or they don't want to burden them, they can let it out into this basket, and we can look at it together. And we can have this moment of like this, like grief, like shared grief is grief lessened. Same with like the sharing your fears about the dying process is we can connect. Sometimes when you get a terminal diagnosis, there's this bubble around you. People don't know what to say. They don't know how to act. So a doula is someone who is comfortable in that space and can give you tools or ask you questions to deepen your own knowledge about yourself and what you want from this experience. So it's really hard to define what a doula does, right? Because if you're with somebody, I've been with people who I can't even say the word death or dying or anything. They wince and they're like, don't. And I'm like, okay. You know, my job is to pry open a door, however briefly. And if they slam it shut, then I'm like, okay, we're good. You know, I'm going to keep you comfortable. Maybe I'll play your favorite music. I'll give you a hand and foot massage. I'll make sure your mouth isn't dry. I'll contact your family. Maybe I'll hold the phone while they say goodbye. Maybe I'll coach your family on how do you say goodbye to someone. That's why I love it, because it's different with everybody. And I'm learning something with every resident, every person I kind of shepherd.
I like that word, shepherd. Yeah. I think about, you know, when recently with my mother-in-law, you know, when I wasn't in the room, when my father-in-law and my sister-in-law said to her, okay, the doctor has said, like, this is it. Like, it's probably days. But I hear that she went immediately into caregiver mode herself, immediately into, well, honey, are you going to be okay? And what about this? And like, I'm fine, but what about you guys? And I saw that throughout this whole process, you know, and I'm the daughter-in-law, right? So it's sort of like, where's my role? And so watching conversations where we would try to have about, okay, Mom, do you want to be in the hospital? Do you want to be in hospice? Do you want to be at home? And she would just sort of look at us, you know, and I just thought, what does she want? You know? And so I just reading what it is that you do, I think about the benefit of having this sort of objective person. That, because in that moment, I remember a nurse saying, let's hear what she wants.
Yeah.
But it was almost like she was looking at all of us like, I'm not used to asking for what I want. And,
yeah, right.
You know, and so I think we bring to, I'm sure, all of our moments, but especially this moment, like all our history. Right. And so if our history has not been to say what we want, but to be the caregiver and the mom and the wife and to take care of everybody, like that's what she was doing up until that last moment. And I was just sort of watching as like, and so reading what you did, I just thought, man, what if this objective person had been in the room to just say to her, like, nobody else is around, like, what do you want? You know, what, you know, what would we maybe have learned? Because I think that there was just this sort of unspoken stuff of like, we all kept thinking about, we're a big Lutheran family. And so there's a lot of hymn singing. And they were all talked about when her mother passed away, that all the siblings just decided they all needed to sing and that they thought it made the mom crazy. And right. And so then everyone's like, well, now we can't sing for her because she told us that story once about her mom. But and so I think everyone was just sort of guessing.
Was there a period when she was in like a sleep coma and non-responsive?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So when my dad died, I had never done this with anyone, but when my dad died, he had maybe 18 hours of being in a sleep coma. The chaplain from the place where he lives came in, and I have 4 siblings.
Yeah.
And the chaplain sat down. He's like, I think this is really a time of like remembering. Like, what is coming up for you as you sit with your father? And then we all got to share, like, who our father was to us. So it was cathartic for us because we could see, oh my gosh, it was like we all had such a different relationship with him. But, I know my dad was listening, and the hearing is the last thing to go. And then he said, we talked for 45 minutes about who our father was to us and how we will carry his legacy forward.
Yeah.
And then he said, does anyone have anything they want to apologize for? And then like everybody went around and apologized for something, except for my mom, who has dementia, and she's still mad at my dad. So we were really hoping my mom could come through, but she couldn't. So, but a lot of times mothers especially stay mothers until the very last second, where often women will wait until their kids leave the room to die because they don't want to traumatize their child.
Right.
And so I always tell people when they're that story about like, tell them that they can go, tell them that they can go. I'm like, tell them that you're going to be okay because they've prepared you for this. Like that you will be carrying their essence around in your heart like we do.
Sure.
And to thank them and say, well, you know what, I can do this because you've prepared me and loved me and whatever. Or, if it wasn't a good relationship, same thing. Say what was hard about that relationship with your mother, and just say, if you can, say, I forgive you for these things that were really hard for me in my life because you were my mother. But,
Yeah. Do you find that because you said there's an opportunity there for the person themselves to share their fears with you, do you do the same with the caregivers?
Yeah. So I definitely prep the caregivers, especially for like terminal agitation. I mean, I try to meet with them before we go into active dying to say, what stories are you carrying around in your head about how this is going to go down? Because we all tell ourselves stories about when we have an information gap, we're guessing about I certainly did it with Rob. I was like, he's going to have a blood clot in his lung and like, I'm going to come in there and he's going to be covered in blood. That never happened.
Right.
No one asked me what stories I was carrying around. So I never got to expose that story. I just was afraid of it the whole time. So I meet with family and say, what's your experience with death and dying? These are the stages. Yeah. And terminal agitation doesn't happen for everyone. But if it does, it is really, really hard on the caregiver. So you're going to have to take care of yourself. It's okay for you to go outside, get under the sky, drink lots of water, stay in touch with your breath, because it is really, really, really hard, and it doesn't last forever. So just remind yourself when you're in it that this is a stage, and who knows what's happening in that stage. Like some people say, they're separated, their spirit is separating from their body. They think they're going on a journey. They're, they want to pack their bags. They're very insistent that they have to, move. So yes, I do a lot of work with the caregivers, just trying to prepare them and, making sure they don't have stuff that is left unsaid.
Yeah. Can you tell us, I'm not sure if what that term, terminal agitation means?
It just means there's like very specific steps in the dying process. And like, you're not eating, you're not drinking, you can't get out of bed anymore. So terminal agitation is when they're really uncomfortable. Like they cannot, for Rob, it was like he kept trying to get out of bed. Frequently people are trying to get out of bed. So if they're on hospice at home, that's when there's a fall and they break a hip, or you have to get the lift crew to come get them back in bed. So, for Rob, he was sitting on the side of the bed and he had his, hands on the tray table, and then he'd be like I want to go home. I want to go home. I want to go home. And then, you'd get him in the lounge chair and they don't really know where they are in space. And
Yeah.
they can think, if I had people like relive getting out of a burning house and we have to get the baby and we have to get this stuff, or, going to an airport, there's a restlessness that cannot be, you can't find comfort for them. And I think, I don't know if it's okay to take those moments away from them, like with medicine. Like, I feel like it's part, I don't know. There's so many questions about death and dying that I don't have the answer, that I have a curiosity about. And like, I literally won't know until I die my own self.
Right.
Are there, you just said there, it's one of the stages. And I think that, like you said, we don't know these things. And I love that you said that question about like, what are the stories you have in your mind? And I think that that's true. We're all walking around like, well, I for real had a moment of like, I saw a Grey's Anatomy episode once where this thing happened. So when I saw it happening with my mother-in-law, I was like, I think this is like the thing from Grey's Anatomy. I mean, that was my context.
Yeah.
Right.
For real. And so, and I, as a caregiver for my husband for all these years, I'm an advocate. So I was the one going out into the hallway and saying to the hospice nurse, what are we seeing? What does this look like? What is this telling us? How much time? But the others are not as more maybe medically savvy as I am. And so they didn't even think to do that. Right. And so is there any, and obviously every situation is so different, but is there anything, because I'm guessing our listeners as caregivers have a lot of stories in their head, right, about what this could maybe look like for their person. And so I don't know, is there, when you said that was one of the stages, are there stages that you can tell us about, so that like almost like a 101, is there anything that we can kind of know about as we prepare for this with anybody in our life, right?
Yeah, most definitely. There's a book by Barbara Carnes, Karnes. It's like a pamphlet more. And I think every hospice uses it. I think it's called Dawn from Our Sight. And it basically has all the stages. But if you think of it elementally, like earth is the first element to leave the body. And so your muscles and you just become very weak, very tired. You're sleeping more. Eventually you can't get out of bed. Eventually you are unable to even lift your arms. Eventually you are unable to open your eyes. Just this general weakness. And then the next stage would be water. Your urine output slows. Your urine becomes very, very dark. Sometimes tears dry up. Sometimes they flow. You lose your ability to regulate your temperature, so you can get hot or you can get cold, or your extremities can start to mottle because blood is pooling and you can't circulate it anymore. And then, your breathing becomes very erratic. You can have long lapses of not breathing at all. You can have really quick breathing. You lose your ability to swallow. So you have this gargle, the death rattle at the back of your throat, which is, I always tell caregivers, it's upsetting for caregivers, but it doesn't seem to bother the person who's dying. I think at that point, they are so not inhabiting their body that it's not, I mean, you can pick up their limbs and they're not aware of any of they're not going to squeeze your hand back.
Right.
Yeah. And I would say like a month or two before death, they can start saying cryptic things or see people in the room or talk to people that you can't see. And I always think, like people are coming to get them. Like it is not unusual that people are talking to people in their family who have passed and they think you can see them. They'll be like, they'll be talking to me and they'll like, excuse me, like, why are you here? Or it's very real to them. So I always say when residents are upset, they're like, wait, you can't see that kid on the tricycle right there? And then I was like, no, but you get to see things that I don't get to see.
Yeah.
You're like walking between the worlds.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? Right. There's a lot of unknown.
Right.
Yeah. It must be really interesting working in an area where not that you're not an expert on death, but you are leading people through that. And yet it's a rare situation where you don't know what the experience is that you're leading them through in some ways. right?
Right. Someone described it saying a death doula is someone who is accompanying someone in the dying process is a little bit like saying a birth doula is helping the baby through the birth canal. There's these places that we just can't get to.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're not meant to be there,
Right. Right. Yeah.
And I often say to people who are really afraid of dying, like, what if this is as much suffering as you're going to go through? Because often it's the weeks leading up to the dying where you're nauseous or you're in pain or whatever it is. Like, what if this is as much suffering as you're going to have? Because eventually you're going to be so weak that you're going to be sleeping all the time. I mean, the vast majority of people have that just steady, slow and steady. I mean, I would say the COPD and the breathing ones are harder because cancer is like, it's pretty predictable and people they're tired. They're not aware. But if you have COPD or something where there's shortness of breath, it can be a little trickier. And then I will do like different kinds of breathing, give them some tools. So when they feel the shortness of breath coming, I can get them ready or.
Yeah. So something that I've experienced is sort of a lot with these last two experiences is sort of like being on the caregiver side and trying to think about whose wishes, I don't want to say win, right? But I think about like, so with my daughter's friend, her friend requested that my daughter be in the room when she passed away. And at first we were like, of course, yes, whatever you want. And then we walked away from the room that day of that conversation. And I thought, what did I just sign my 16-year-old up for?
Yeah.
Right. And so I really had to struggle with who, is it the person dying? Is it their wishes that like sort of trump everything else? Or is it the people who are going to be left behind who are then left with that experience of what they just saw and they, you know what I mean? And so how do you see that? Right. And how do you help balance the wishes of all the different people in the room?
Yeah, I think that the dying person can ask for what they want, but your daughter gets to decide, and you get to help your daughter decide what is going to be right for her. And I think that's a lot of coaching, right? Because your daughter has no experience with death. So it could be this opportunity, if she has a curiosity about it, to kind of help her wade in slowly as you get. I mean, it happened quickly, it sounds like. I think also kids need support, like where you would be with her and you would be checking her, like making sure she takes breaks every 15 minutes or answering all of the stories that she has in her head about what this experience is going to be like. I mean, I don't think you can force someone to be a vigil partner.
Yeah.
But you can help them understand what it's going to mean before they make that decision. I mean, I think we would all be better off if we had, like, when we were 16, we had an experience like we used to when people died at home.
Yeah.
And we all knew how death came. And we dug our own graves and we made our own coffins and we dressed our dead and we had home funerals. We just don't have any of that knowledge anymore. So I will have residents who are 80 years old and I say, what's your experience with death and dying? And they say, like, well, I visited my mom a couple weeks before she died but not, I know the stages of how a human body shuts down.
Right.
We don't know that. We're so disconnected from, the Buddhists start every day like, I'm of the nature to grow old. I'm of the nature to get sick. I'm of the nature to die. Like I am in a temporary body and I am not going to be shocked when it breaks down because that is the nature of this body. That was something that happened with Rob where I was like, wow, I have actually been thinking like that I myself am going to live to the average life expectancy. And that is so not promised. After Rob died, my older son was really angry. And my younger son said, why is he so mad all the time? And I said, I think it's because he thinks it's unfair that his dad died. And then my younger son, who was 9 at the time, said, but dads die all the time. I mean, around the world, dads die all the time. Why not ours? Like, why would we be special? And I'm like, You little Buddha back then. I mean, come on. But he's right. I mean, my goal as a human is like, we are all in a softball field and death is like hitting fly balls. And eventually we are all going to have that ball in our mitt. And I personally don't want to be shocked. And I don't want to be like, what? Because that is the deal. You know, I want to be like, oh, this ball is here now. Like, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
You know, just like,
and it's so shocking to me that like, it's the only thing that we all have in common. Right.
Yeah.
And so how is it so taboo and surprising and tragic when it's like the one thing that we all are born and we all die, like that's it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so but it's just, it continues to be this thing that we're like, oh, it's happening to us.
Yeah. And it informs the decisions that we make around end of life.
Yeah.
You know, like my dad, when he was dying, he was 94. He had a good life. He had these health problems that were either he was going to have a stroke and it was going to kill him, or he was going to bleed out from like blood thinners and diverticulitis. And I was like, you know, you have a choice about which of these deaths that you're shooting for, because, you know, if you're on all these meds, then it's a crapshoot, which happened. He's like, I don't want a stroke. I'm like, great. This is how we're going to proceed. And, I asked the doctor, I said, you know, like, what's he more likely to die of, or which is a better death? And there's this huge long pause. And he's like, we don't think like that. I'm like, well, he has to. This is how his body is going to shut down. So he has to. He doesn't have a choice. So I said to my dad, use this analogy. I was like, it's like you are on a dock and these big wooden ships are coming up to the dock and one of them says cancer. And like, you could get on that ship and you could go away, or you could say, nope, I'm going to stay on this dock. I'm going to get treatment. I want to be here longer. And then that ship goes away. And then maybe 5 years later, some other boat comes up to the dock. Maybe it's called pneumonia. And you decide, okay, the condition of the dock is not as great. I'm not as happy here. I'm in more pain. My suffering is up. So maybe I'll get on this pneumonia ship. But he said, but I'm afraid. And I said, and if you're afraid, you're going to stay on that dock until you are suffering miserably. That's how it goes. Like the last 6 months of most lives are miserable suffering. And if I can give you these special goggles so you can see that suffering coming and you can get on a more attractive boat and say goodbye and really, you know, have some sort of culmination of this life. So I was like, there are boats coming, and you need to cultivate in your own sense, in your own body, a sense of knowing of when you're done. Because we can keep you alive a really long time. We can keep you alive in a specialized wheelchair, and you won't be able to talk, and you won't be able to feed yourself, and you won't be able to walk or do anything that makes you who you are, but we'll keep you alive. So unless you see that moment coming, that's going to happen to you. I mean, everybody says, I don't want to go to a nursing home ever. I'm like, well, you will, unless you start making choices. Like, do you know Barbara Ehrenreich, that writer?
No.
She is a breast cancer survivor, and she was on tamoxifen. And she's like, at 75, I'm going to stop taking it. I'm going to stop taking all my meds. And I'm going to die of natural causes. The idea of dying from natural causes is completely foreign to us, because we can push things so far.
Right.
But it's like, I don't know, then we don't have autonomy. We're like, you know, there's that video. I will talk forever, so you're going to have to cut me off. Video, like the 100 things, that make you who you are, starting with waking up in the morning, getting out of bed, going to the bathroom, brushing your teeth, making your coffee, letting your dog out, you know, going for a run, whatever those 100 things are for you. Eventually you're going to only be able to do 75. You know, you're going to get old, you're going to have some condition, and then you're only going to do 50. And so you have to decide for yourself, like, when is the point where I'm not doing enough of the things that make me feel who I am, that I'm looking for those boats on the dock.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I think like as caregivers, like I get death is not something that at least I've heard talked about a lot, because it's like, I imagine it's similar if you're caring for a parent, but like as like a spousal caregiver, like you don't want to lose your person. Like somehow death is this door that is like don't want to even think about having to walk through. And I think what it's, from your perspective in the work that you do, of like, you can't ignore that door is there, and that one day they will go through that door. So like, what conversations should we be having? What planning, and like when to start that process,
Mm-hmm. I think there's this Buddhist monk, Joan Halifax. Have you heard of her?
No.
So she has written a book called Being with Dying, and it is basically an exercise book about getting ready for death. It has, meditations and exercises and questions. But my favorite part of it is she says, imagine the death you are most afraid of. Like all the things about death that you're afraid of, write them down, live what it feels like to have that death. And then imagine the best possible death where everything happens just the way you want it. And write that all down and live that. And then this is the critical part. Ask yourself, what am I willing to give up to get the death I want? Because if you want, if your imagined death is at home I'll just say my imagined death is at home in my sunroom. I have windows open. My kids are here. I want to have a home funeral. And if I have some sort of illness, I'm going to at some point have to say, okay, I'm not going to do everything the doctors want me to do because I want to have a month at home with my people, like eating food I love and smelling things I love and all the things. But people aren't asking themselves those questions because they're afraid. So B.J. Miller says there is a thicket of denial and anxiety and fear that must be cut through before people can have meaningful conversations about what matters to them around the end of life. So true. But who's willing to cut through the thicket?
Yeah.
Well, and those first questions you asked, Jane, are so powerful. And I think at first I was thinking of them in terms of my person. So like I am married to a person who has already outlived his age expectancy by like 12 years, and he's 44. And so like when you said, what death are you most afraid of? Like I wasn't picturing mine, I was picturing his. Right. And so as caregivers, I think that that's a really powerful, it goes back to the questions you asked earlier about what are the pictures in your head or the stories that you're telling yourself about what this could look like. And something that's hard with his disease is everybody it's usually almost always cancer, but it's a different kind of cancer. And so it's not like this is the thing that it's going to be. And so you sort of play out these stories of like, well, maybe it'll be this and maybe it'll be this. And we've had plenty of, unfortunately, like dress rehearsals of watching people with this disease pass away and seeing them in their final stages and going to their funerals. And so anyway, I think the thing is like, those are really powerful questions for us to ask ourselves. But I think as caregivers, for us to ask about our person, because like you said, we don't know, like we assume that the person that we're caring for who is ill will likely precede us in death, but we don't know. So I think it's good for us to ask both,
right?
And then to have those conversations together. I mean, I think it would be interesting if I asked myself those questions about myself and about my husband, and he asked them about himself and about me. And then we came together to say that. I mean, I had moments in those final days with my mother-in-law watching her, end these final days, where I called my mom at one point and I said, I would rather have someone take me out in the back alley and shoot me. I mean, I know it sounds dramatic, and that usually sounds like the most violent possible thing that can happen. But I just thought that just seems like, boop, gone, done. And like you just said at one point, 6 months, the last 6 months are I don't know what adjectives you use, but made it not sound pretty. And that doesn't sound good for any of us, And so,
yeah. And I think for me, when I'm saying that the last 6 months, my frame of reference is a skilled nursing home where people, could get on the pneumonia boat.
Yeah.
Or they could there are opportunities, but they are clinging so desperately to life. And I'm like, so I want I want them to know that what they're clinging to.
Mm.
You know, I really try hard. I mean, in this interview, I'm coming across very judgmental and opinion filled. But when I'm with a resident, I am like, I have no judgment about anything.
Right.
I just
Yeah.
want you to have all the information that you need
Yeah.
to make the decisions, so this happens the way you want it to.
Yeah.
And if you won't let me say the D word, then that's your choice as well. But you know, you're giving up some power here.
So as caregivers, I mean, you gave us some good questions that we can be asking ourselves about our own death, about our person's death. But what are other things that we can be doing now? And as we get closer, like we have some listeners whose people are close, right? Like, what are the things that you would be saying to us? Because I saw on your website, you're not accepting clients right now. Everyone's going to want you, Jane. But if either to find another a death doula themselves, or like, what are the things that we can be doing to prepare ourselves and prepare our person for this inevitable?
Yeah. Well, the Minnesota Death Collaborative is a group that I co-founded. I'm not super involved anymore, but they have a directory of end of life care. They have celebrants, they have doulas, they have home funeral people, they have all kinds of great people. They have monthly education offerings about different topics like green burial or home funerals or sacred ritual, or, you know, all kinds of stuff. I would say do an advanced care directive that isn't just about the medical stuff. Like the 5 wishes covers a lot of vigil plan, comfort. And I agree, do it as like both of us. You know, like let's do this together and talk about what do we want. I also ask people, like, I ask residents, like, where in your whole life did you feel the most safe? And is it your grandmother's arms? Is it, you know, whatever it is? Maybe it's not with a human, it's with an animal, or it's in the woods or whatever. And I like to have that because I do a guided visualization when they're in that sleep coma of like surrendering to the ease of that moment and the safety and the peace and the love. So it'd be great for you to know about that for your person.
Yeah.
And then there's all kinds of tools like Go Wish is a deck of choices. You know, when you're going to have a baby, I'm an adopted mother, so I don't have any baby. I never had a baby, but they make birth plans where they give you all the options. These cards that have, you can flip them, like pain meds, no pain meds, or, you know, music, no music, candles, other kind of lighting, water birth, land birth, whatever.
Yeah.
So there's cards that have that for end of life, all these choices. And so you give them and people flip them back and forth. And then you have a plan. You're like, oh, this is important. I want to be kept clean. I want someone to brush my teeth and wash my face every day. And then you have them take away like 6 of them. So then you can start to see what they value.
Sure.
So that's the kind of information that's going to give you confidence to, you know, send them off on the raft of love that they've told you they wanted.
Yeah. Yeah.
And read. I mean, read. There's a really great, Sally Tisdale wrote Advice to Future Corpses. Really great book. She's a Buddhist monk. She's a feminist. Just super great. BJ Miller wrote A Beginner's Guide to the End. Really comprehensive. It's basically like that book on pregnancy that everybody gets.
Like
what to expect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So he wrote basically what to expect when you're dying.
Okay.
I mean, I think some things I'm taking from this is, number one, like, let's just start having the conversations, right? Let's talk about this with our person, but also just in general, so that it's not this sort of like shrouded in mystery until you're in it. And then you're like, and I think the thing that's sticking with me is, like you said, these stories that are in our head of like, how's it going to go down? You know, and then we're all sort of walking around with these stories that might be completely false. And that if we would stop to ask some questions and to educate ourselves, that we might learn, like, oh, that's not how this is going to go at all. And I've actually been painting this whole picture falsely, right? And then to have those questions like that you said about the what is the best possible and the worst possible, and just to start. I mean, I think the big theme is like, talk about it. talk about it, learn about it, so that it's not just this thing that we don't until the very end, and then we don't know how to talk about it, and then it's over,
Yeah. And if you're scared, I always tell people, like, think about your head, your heart, your spirit, and your body. How do you want to feel when you're on that deathbed and you can no longer move? If you're going to be thinking about what the afterlife is or what's going to happen when you die, start doing research now and just learn a bunch of stuff so you can quiet your mind and like get right with whatever your spiritual stuff is.
Yeah.
So you can be at peace there, and tell your people your vigil plan so your body can be at peace.
Yeah.
There's work to be done for sure.
I think to end us off, do you feel like, or is there anything you can, this is kind of, I'm going to ask this selfishly, but I think it will support other people as well. But just because like at this moment, I'm feeling like so many people have, I'm like the left behind, right? Like we've just lost these people. And so many of us as caregivers are likely to be the one left behind. And so, do you have any words for those that are left behind after death?
I'm sorry. It's so freaking hard. But I really believe, well, first of all, you need to get, you have all these experiences right now. So those are all opportunities to get really good at nurturing your grief. That's another thing. We're terrible at grief. So like, I tell people, build a focal point in your home for your grief. So you have candles, you have pictures of those people, like Rob, I used to pour a glass of wine for him and a glass of wine for me and sit down and play his music. I still play his music and dance. I mean, it's been 10 years. I still play his music and dance around my kitchen and cry. And I have a fabulous boyfriend. Get good at nurturing grief starting now. And then I think you'll be ahead of the game because, ultimately, I had this moment over Christmas where I felt like I'm standing on the shore of this great ocean and the tide is rolling up and it is taking people from me. And it is, there is loss, but it is also bringing people to me. And it is, Rob died on Christmas. So at Christmas, I had my niece in town. My son has a new baby. We were celebrating Hanukkah and Christmas and Rob's anniversary of his death. And I was just like, and my father had just died. I was like, so steeped in just the richness of life. And it's not, those people who have died are still with me. And, in a heartbeat, we're all going to be together again. I mean, I'm a big believer. I mean, Rob was not religious. He was like, what the hell is going to happen to me? And I was like, oh my God, I have all these spiritual beliefs. I'm not religious either, but I feel like since then I feel his presence, and he would have said, you're crazy, but I feel it. And if you're open to seeing signs, I just feel like there is such a thin veil between us and wherever they are. There's a great series on Netflix, Surviving Death.
Okay.
Really, really, I mean, some of them are nutty, but some really, really great stories.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I think we could have talked for a long, long time.
No, this has been a really, really good to hear from you on this. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today.
Well, thanks.
I know it was a little bit of back and forth to make it all happen, but we pulled through, and
we did.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah.
Well, great.
And thank you.
Thanks so much. And thanks for the work you do. I mean, it's important. Caregivers need support. That's a really hard job.
It's true. It's true. And that firsthand. So yeah. Well, thank you. I think there's a lot of the questions that you brought up today that I feel like we got to pull out and just like keep asking ourselves and get our listeners to ask, because that was some really powerful things that can start to guide us to start having these conversations. So listeners, I want to make a quick plug that we have started doing through my work at the Negative Space, started doing support groups. And these support groups, what we're doing is basing them on our last podcast. And so just stay tuned that the dates, life is not pretty enough that we can say it's every other Sunday, but just keep an eye on your email and on social media, and we will let you know when those support groups come up. We have already had 2, and they've been just beautiful gatherings of folks. And so keep an eye out for that, because we will continue to have those support groups so that it's a good place for us caregivers to come together and talk about, continue these conversations that we have on the podcast. So All right, Jane, thanks so much for everything that you do. We're glad to have been connected with you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I did want to say,
please,
because he's in Washington, NEDA, National End of Life Doula Alliance, has a state directory for the whole country. So wherever you are, you can find a doula.
Thank you. Okay,
Great.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.